This actually happened to me just a week ago, and I finally had the time to write this up and send it in to you. I had to share this. I was coming home from a wedding rehearsal of two of my best friends, so I was in a really good mood. I was enjoying the air as it was warmer than it had been, a nice break from the cold, gloomy March we've been having. It was pretty late, so there wasn't much traffic on the highway either, which made the drive that much better. As I was driving along, I glanced in the rear view after seeing some headlights behind me. It was nothing out of the ordinary, so I thought nothing else of it, and continued driving. But then the vehicle seemed to grab my attention, because it looked like they were flashing their brights. It was weird, but some people are just jerks on the road, so I made a mental note and continued on. It then became pretty clear that they were gaining on me fairly fast, and I was expecting them to swerve over at the last minute to pass me. They were obviously going way too fast. I watched them catch up to me, however, they didn't move over. I was in the middle lane. The right lane was consistently an exit or emerging lane for people entering the highway, so I typically stayed in the middle to keep out of the way. And that left the left lane open for them to pass, but they didn't. They got really close to my bumper, and then would back off, and then get close behind me again. I had no idea who these people were and why they were even doing this, but at first it just irritated me. I thought they were just trying to be an ass and maybe scare me. Look, I'm a guy and I don't typically scare easily, so I just did what anyone would have done in that situation. I tapped my brakes and flipped the bird. Apparently they were not happy with that. They laid on their horn for several seconds, and then finally swerved over to my left. I tried to look at them, but their windows were so dark and tinted that I couldn't make anything out. They kept the same speed as me, but would slowly veer into my lane. Now they were making things way too dangerous, and it did start to bother me. It was getting pretty close to my exit, so I got over to the right, preparing to get off the highway and hopefully leave behind whatever this drama was that they were trying to cause. But they seemed to have other ideas. As I got over, they moved to the middle lane and then swerved to the right lane, leaving me to hit my brakes pretty hard so as to not hit them. It was damn near an accident, and I would have hit them, which would have put me at fault. I just slowed down more to keep my distance, waiting to finally get out of there. I saw my exit and started veering to get over, hoping they wouldn't be paying attention. Unfortunately, they were, and again they swerved over. But this time they turned sharp enough that they were nearly diagonal across the lanes, forcing me to come to a full stop. They had also stopped, which started putting me into a panic. Why were they doing this to me? Why did they charge behind me and immediately start being aggressive? Then I saw a woman get out of the passenger seat. I wasn't going to take any chances, so I grabbed my cell phone and called 911. I started explaining to the operator where I was and what was happening, as the woman approached my passenger side window. She was wearing some dirty-looking jean shorts and some weird-looking halter top. I think that's what they're called. It tied around her neck, but was sheer, as you could see her bra underneath it. Her hair was in a very loose and messy bun, and she was carrying what looked like a sandwich. Her face was seemingly expressionless, but when she reached my window, she motioned for me to roll it down. I did as she requested, but just enough to hear what she had to say. She was pretty small, but I don't think she would have even been able to fit her arm through it. This whole time, I still had the operator on the phone, hoping they would hear everything that she said, too. That woman's face went from 0 to 100 within the time of me rolling down the window. She was literally screaming at me, saying, "What the hell is wrong with you? Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you pull over?" She was calling me names and threatening to have her boyfriend beat me up. I was taken aback by her demeanor, but between her taking a breath, I finally decided to try to stand my ground. "You guys damn near hit me. What the hell is wrong with you, you psycho?" I was surprised that actually seemed to shut her up. She stared at me, took a bite of her sandwich, and said, "Yeah. Can I borrow $50? What the hell? Why would I just give some random stranger money? A random stranger that just tried to run me over and screamed at me. I told her hell no, and then she called me another name and walked off after kicking my door. The operator called out to me, so I went to explain what was happening. As I watched her walk off, when she abruptly turned around and threw her sandwich at my windshield, making me jump. I could hear a man's voice shouting, and I could see the woman shouting back as she flung open the passenger door and got in. She barely got the door closed before they sped off, back onto the highway, and were out of sight. I just sat there trying to process what the hell just happened. I told the operator that they were gone, but she said an officer was already close by, and asked me to wait for them to at least make a report. Shortly after, I could hear the sirens approaching, and waited until they stopped and asked me to get out. I again explained what happened to them, and if it weren't for the remnants of bread and mayonnaise on my windshield, and the operator hearing it all, I don't think they would have believed me. They took a report, but since they were long gone, there wasn't really much else they could do. They offered to escort me home, but I passed, doubting that they would ever find me. I then watched them drive down the road and disappear. I made it home without another incident, but the whole thing kept playing in my mind as I had to scrape off my windshield. Having someone ride my bumper like that and then aggressively try to hit me, not to mention get out to berate me, was pretty terrifying. I was expecting her to be the distraction while the driver would come over to my side and try to do something worse. And that's why I called for help. But then, as I cleaned my window off, I couldn't help but laugh. Did she really think asking for money would work? And why did she throw her sandwich? That drive home was a roller coaster of emotions. And it was so bizarre that I question if it really happened. Thank you for taking the time to read this. I have a couple of stories to relate. One was a strange nightmare, and the other, I was in between sleep and awake, and I figured I would send these in to you. The nightmare. I was walking across a sea of sand. The sky was a dark twilight purple. For some reason, the horizon was an electric blue that just highlighted the separation between land and sky. I was walking for a long time in this dream, and a feeling of dread was coming over me. I kept feeling that there was something watching me, or that I was on my way to something really bad. This feeling kept growing as I walked on, to the point that I was lingering in my steps. I didn't want to confront what was coming. I'd come to the conclusion that I was heading towards a terrible thing. Dune after dune I climbed. The dream made it seem like it was ages in travel. My steps felt like iron, slow plodding, and it was hard to pick up my feet again. I do not know how many dunes I climbed. One looked much like the next, which made it hard to keep track of any sense of scale, time, or distance. The sky never changed, but the horizon was slowly shifting through colors. From a blue-green that made me think of the sea towards the yellow of a sunset. Finally, as I crested the final dune in my slow, plodding way, there was sweat dripping from me from the effort to push on to the final step. I saw the source of my fear, that thing that I had been dreading. There, hanging, unsupported in the sky, a stoplight. It menacingly shifted from red to green to yellow and then back to red. I was around 10 or 11 years old having this dream. It was not like I was learning to drive. I have no idea why my brain conjured up a nightmare about a stoplight. It was such a strange dream, and it has stuck with me. This one was on the border of sleep. I was lying in my bed having a hard time getting to sleep. I would often have bouts of insomnia, and still do. Sleep is something that eludes me often, but I've made my peace with that. I had learned a few tricks to simulate sleep. For me, they don't leave me as tired as flip-flopping over the mattress. I would take the time to still my mind, trying to block out all external noise. This would take a decent amount of time in the beginning, and after practice it got easier. From there, I would focus on the background static in my brain. I don't know if everyone else has this, but for me, it's like a poorly tuned radio. Just a white noise from the back of my consciousness. I would then just listen to that, doing my best to not respond to any other stimuli. Again, this got easier with practice. It was much like meditation, as I learned. Often my brain would then make up conversations from the static, just like little vignettes to entertain me. Often this would be when I would fall asleep. Normally it would take about a couple of hours, stopping and restarting the process. This time was a little different. I don't know what happened, but this scene went on for longer than normal. It was something like this. Interior of a familiar gas station that also made and sold fresh donuts. There were a couple of people behind the counter. One was a cashier, and the other was busy making donuts. They were talking about what types they needed to be made for their shift. In walked a police officer who grabbed a coffee and a donut. "Hi, Officer Wilkins, just coming on shift?" the cashier asked. "Yep, needed my pick-me-up. I hate these night shifts." The officer then handed over the money. "Well, these ones are fresh. Tim just put these out." The cashier nodded towards the employee who was making the pastries. "My compliments, Tim. Fresh ones are the best," the officer said as he had taken a bite. "I may hate working nights, but being able to get fresh donuts for my shift almost makes up for it. Have a good night, Deb. Thanks, Tim." The officer makes a small salute with the coffee cup and leaves. That was the end of it. No big things, no revelations, just a mundane slice of life scenario. I'm pretty sure that I had drifted off to sleep, and that this was all the dream. At least, I thought so until the next night. I knew trying to get to sleep this night was impossible, so I decided to go to the gas station for my dream the night before and see if they really made the pastries fresh at night. I had always assumed it would be in the morning when they made them. As I walked into the gas station, there was Deb and Tim. They were in the same place they had been in my dream. They were talking between the two of them about what donuts needed to be made. It wasn't identical to my dream, but close enough that it was eerie. So I asked them on the spur of the moment if Officer Wilkins had been in last night. They said yes, and then I asked them about the conversation. I recounted my dream, and they told me that it was how they remembered that night going. Now, I don't know why my mind decided that the one and only time I astral project, it's to a donut-slinging gas station. All to listen in on a mundane conversation. I had only been into this place a couple of times. It was across town from where I lived. So this wasn't even a place that I was at all the time, or even drove by. Those were two of the strangest dreams I have had. Well, one may not have been a dream. I've attempted to replicate the static experience again, but to no avail. So, I hope at the very least these entertained everyone. Sorry about the flowery language on the first one. I just wanted to try and capture the mysterious and fearful feelings I was having in that nightmare. Thank you, Raven, for taking the time to read this, and thank you to all of you for listening. Fresh out of high school, I got a job working at a small, local fish and tackle store. It was an old store, owned by an equally older man, Bob. Yes, his name was actually Bob. He was nice and typically hired a lot of younger people in or just out of high school. Sometimes he would even buy us all breakfast or lunch. Just a truly nice guy. He was old enough to be my grandfather, and no, this story is not about him, thankfully. The only problem with Bob is that he was probably a bit too giving. I say that because the store was not doing so hot. He was talking to someone about the sales and how they weren't as good as they used to be, and how his bookkeeping had gone downhill since his wife passed, because she was the one that normally did it. He was talking to a mutual friend of his, and my mom's, and they were talking about it over dinner. So, while I wasn't anticipating this, I also wasn't surprised when he introduced us to some kind of CPA that he had hired. He told us that we may see him wandering around the store, behind the counters, etc., and to just give him anything he needs, as he was going to be trying to iron out the disorganization and hopefully help him get his affairs in order. This guy was also older, but not as old as Bob. I would say maybe he was in his 50s or so. I don't remember his name, so I'll just call him Marvin. From the first time I met Marvin, something honestly felt off about him. He didn't do anything directly to any of us, as far as I was aware, but something was just weird about him. Marvin was going to be working in the apartment above the store. All down this road, the buildings were the same. 2 stories. The bottom was for commercial use, the fishing store, there was a barber shop, a dress shop, and so on. And the second floor had apartments, typically 1 bedroom or studio. Bob owned both floors, and he said the apartment had too many issues he could afford to fix, so he wouldn't be okay with someone living there in those conditions, even though it would have brought in more money for him. So he just used it as extra storage for his inventory, personal items, and even a small office. I'd actually brought a few boxes up there for him, so I had an idea of what the main room, or living room, looked like. It was mostly boxes, a filing cabinet, and a desk, chair, and floor lamp nearby. It almost had an eerie vibe to it, but I rarely had to go in there, so it hardly crossed my mind. So, basically, Marvin was going to be using the apartment as his place to set up and work during the day. So while he may be in the store at times, he was typically going to be upstairs and out of our way. A few days into our routine, the rumors started going around with some of the employees about Marvin. Someone joked that he didn't seem entirely human, that he was trying to do or say things to seem more hip, like speaking in memes or something. But they said that he just seemed stiff and joked about him slipping up and showing his true form. Just silly things like that that obviously didn't make sense. I said earlier that he definitely seemed off, but I kinda felt bad for making fun of him. Maybe he was just awkward and not used to being around kids. He even brought in donuts for us one time, so I avoided making fun of him. I enjoyed working there, and Bob did his best, so I thought it was only fair. However, I'd be lying if I said that his odd behavior didn't live rent-free in my head. When I would close, I would see him coming down the stairs on the side of the building, nearly rushing to leave. Sometimes sweating with his vest or tie undone or loose, like he'd quickly put it on. This specific event happened in the spring, so it wasn't hot enough to be that drenched in sweat. I knew that the AC also worked in the apartment because when I went up there, it was always freezing. Sometimes when I opened with Bob, Marvin's car would already be in the parking lot. I wondered how bad things could be that he would come in so early and stay so late. I remember pointing it out to Bob one time, and while he looked at the apartment with a raised eyebrow, he would also shrug and laugh and say that he's paying him enough, so he should be working a lot to get it all in order. Again, I figured Bob knew about it, so it must be okay. And I was thinking too far into something that I had no control over. But then, those intrusive thoughts took over one night. I was going to be closing alone, one of the few times that I ever did, but Bob had something he had to do that night, so he couldn't return. I noticed Marvin was still there, and I hadn't heard any movement from him. We could usually hear the floor creaking above us as he walked around. Luckily, Marvin had brought in some bagels for us earlier that day, and there were still some left. I decided to use that as an excuse to go upstairs to see if he wanted them. I locked up the store and ascended the side stairs up to the door. I knocked softly on the door and called out to Marvin, but I didn't get any response. However, now standing by the door, I could smell something familiar. I could smell smoke. I was alarmed, but the doorknob was nowhere near hot, so I decided to try to open the door to make sure everything was all right. I slowly opened it, and what I saw was not at all what I was expecting. The lights were off, but there were probably a dozen or so of those miniature candles all over the desk. I assumed that's the smoke I could smell. But the disturbing part was that Marvin was sitting in the chair, leaning back, looking up at the ceiling. And he was naked. The desk was more like a fold-out table, so you could at least see his bare legs, not to mention his bare chest. He was making these weird guttural sounds, like a mix between a hum and a groan. I didn't know what the hell I was witnessing, but I wanted to leave it as just a witness. I shut the door, tossed the bagels into the trash, and quickly got in my car and left. My thoughts were this: I was an 18-year-old guy, barely making $9 an hour. Whatever he was doing up there was none of my damned business. He wasn't hurting anyone, and apparently Bob was seeing the results that he wanted to, so I just left it alone. I don't think Marvin even noticed me, but seeing him like that was pretty embarrassing for me. I called in the next day, though, weirded out by the whole thing, but returned the day after. Marvin also came in, greeting us all, and it was so hard to make eye contact with him. Sorry that this may be a bit anticlimactic, but nothing really did happen after that. Marvin was there for probably another month. Bob got a better system in place and seemed happier about things, so I guess everything worked out in the end. But now I live with that memory. What the hell was he doing? Was this some kind of seance? Was he summoning some kind of accounting gods? Is that a thing? All jokes aside, it was kind of terrifying for me at the time, and I still have not told anyone I personally know, thinking that nobody would honestly believe me. Instead, I'll just share it with you, random people on the internet, so I hope that you enjoyed. Hey Raven, you already know that I'm a fan, but now, thanks to you, I have a new community to hang out with during live streams. Thank you for all your support. You keep me company when I can't sleep. The story will explain why I don't sleep as well as I used to. I live in the state of Victoria in Australia, south of New South Wales. I moved to this neighborhood to live a quiet life. I have fantastic neighbors, no pollution, big sky, magical sunrises and sunsets, loads of green grass, pretty walking tracks, and yes, kangaroos. But you know how it is. Not everything is as it seems. It was the end of November 2021. Yep, lockdown. Spring was slowly turning into summer. The breeze was beautiful that night. The warm, puffy breeze that smells like fresh grass and flowers. So, I decided to sleep with my window open. My bed is next to the window, so that puffy breeze flowed over me as I fell into a calm, happy sleep. I'm still not sure if things had played out differently if I had closed my window, but it's too late to think about that now. what happened happened. But first, I have to explain how the houses are set up here. The blocks are small, so the sides of the houses are close together. Yeah, we're pretty much on top of each other. High-density living at its finest. My room is next to the side fence. My neighbor's back sliding door is right on the other side of the fence. The mother and daughter are smokers, so they would stand in the backyard by the door, have their cigarette, and then go back in. Now that you have an idea of the layout, I'll get on with the story. I was torn out of my sleep by a blood-curdling, terrified scream. It was full-on horror movie. I looked at my phone, 1 a.m. A terrified woman started yelling, "No, no, let me go, please! Let me go! No!" She started sobbing when one of her daughters started calling out for her. "Mom? Mom? What's wrong? What happened?" And all she got was a garbled reply. I'm sitting bolt upright in bed, trying to slow my heartbeat down and trying to catch my breath. I realized I was shaking from the shock of being ripped out of a deep sleep. I could hear her daughter trying to get her inside. She was hysterical by this point, completely broken. So they called the paramedics. Their back door is still open, so I can hear everything through the still night and my window. I turn slightly to face the window, not sure what to do. Do I go over and help? Or would that be too nosy? Soon I hear a friendly male's voice talking her down. The paramedics seem to have it under control. Then, the following conversation happened. Paramedic: "It's okay. You're okay. Let's check you over, but first, how about you put some clothes on?" The mother: "My robe is outside." Paramedic: "Why is it outside?" Mother: "The shadow man grabbed me and tried to drag me away. He was holding the sleeve of my robe. I had to take it off to get away." Everything went silent. I could feel her daughters and paramedics staring at her. In that moment, I felt a sense of dread and fear. Out of nowhere, an image popped into my head. It was a shadow man leaning against the wall of the house, looking through the sliding door, watching them inside the house. He had blonde hair and bright, white eyes. I don't know how I knew he was blonde, I just did. He's real. He's still here. They don't believe her, and he knows that. He's enjoying this. Then, as fast as it popped into my head, it was gone. The paramedics took her to the hospital, where they kept her for 4 months. The shadow man had my poor neighbor in a hospital surrounded by doctors, telling her what she saw wasn't real. When she came back home, the back lights had to be on at night at all times. It made it hard for me to sleep, but I didn't care. I understood. They don't like the light. She now smokes out the front of the house and refuses to go into the backyard at night. Even now at night, I feel uneasy. I haven't felt him again, but I wait for the feeling. Update. The author wanted to add a small note as an update, mainly that the neighbor doesn't remember any of it. This happened back when my now husband and I were just dating. We were 18, just a few months out of high school, and were enjoying our summer before he started college. I wasn't sure what I was doing quite yet, but between us both working full-time, him going to school full-time, and trying to find our own place, I knew we were going to be really busy really soon. So I really appreciated our free time that we got together. At the time of this, I had moved in with him, but he of course was still living at home with his parents, so we were both pretty eager to get our own place. In the meantime, we would find time to go walk around the park, have a nice dinner, or just go driving for a few hours so that we could get some time to ourselves. This event took place during one of those drives. It had been a long week for me. I was feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, so we went out for dinner to try and enjoy the night. Dinner was great. We stayed later than we expected as we'd been talking a lot, so by the time we left, it was pretty dark. We wanted to stop by a store before heading home to grab a few things, so we took this side road to get there. It was a road parallel to the highway and used pretty heavily, with a speed limit of 45 miles per hour. We were cruising along, still talking, when as we approached a stoplight, I saw a dark figure practically sitting in the road. They were sitting towards the side, but in the crosswalk area. They were far enough out that we were going to have to swerve to get around them. As mentioned, being parallel to the highway and the speed limit, this road was heavily used. Maybe not later at night, but even so, where they were was not safe. It was pretty dangerous to be in the road like that. Me, being the person I am, was very concerned at first. I wanted to make sure that they were okay. I asked Will to slowly approach and I would roll down the window to talk to them since they were on my side. We slowed to a stop, and I noticed a few things before I spoke. They looked to be sitting with their knees to their chest, holding them with their face down in their lap. From the looks of their figure and long hair, I assumed they were female. They were wearing a long, dark shirt that stood out against their very pale skin, but her arms and fingers looked incredibly bony and dirty. I could also hear them going between humming to a slight whimper or a cry. "Excuse me, are you okay?" When I said that, all sound from them stopped and they went silent. So I asked again if they were okay or if they needed help, but they didn't respond. Will started to become pretty spooked and said that we should just leave and call the cops. Part of me didn't want to leave her alone, but I also fully understood his concern. It was entirely possible that she was in danger, but it was also possible that this could have been a ploy to get us to stop, and now we were in danger. So I agreed with Will, and as I was trying to tell them that we would be back with help, they pulled their head back and let out a blood-curdling scream. It scared the hell out of me. I leaned back in my seat, so scared that I couldn't seem to figure out how to roll the window back up. I continued to watch as they jumped to their feet, still screaming. Will drove off as I tried to catch my breath, but then he started yelling that they were following us. Without looking, my initial thought was that it was a setup or someone was messing with us, and was now following us in their car. Boy, was I wrong. They were on foot. It was the same woman, or whatever that thing was. And the worst part was that they were catching up. We weren't going 45 yet, maybe about 25 or so, but to see what I presumed to be a human catching up to us scared the hell out of me. They kept running and eventually caught up to us. They were running alongside the back passenger side door. I think we were both wanting to know their endgame since they were on foot, but I was starting to get too freaked out. It was dark, so we only saw blips of light from the streetlights, and forgive me, but their face almost looked blurry. It was like their features were slightly smeared. Something about all of this was giving me existential dread, and I started hyperventilating. I remember I just kept telling Will to go faster, and the last thing I remember was looking over at his speedometer and it reading 52. And then I passed out. I don't think I was out for very long because I awoke to a thud, and Will hit the brakes pretty hard. I asked what happened, and he said that he thought that we'd hit something, but then mentioned the person chasing us couldn't keep up. As bad as it was, I didn't want him to get out of the car. It was like we were in some kind of horror movie. I feared that he would open the door and get dragged off somewhere and I would never see him again. We rolled down the windows to look around, and when we didn't see anything, we drove a little further to see if there was something under the car. Nothing was there. I told him that we needed to just go home. We went straight home from there, and Thankfully, his dad was already in bed, and his mom didn't pay much attention when we walked in. We went to our room, and after I cried for a bit, we tried to dissect everything that had just happened. He agreed that their face looked messed up, but he couldn't understand why either. We also couldn't explain how they could have been going so fast. That's not normal. At least not for a human. He also said that I wasn't out for very long, but he had made a comment that they were losing us, and that was when he noticed I was out. And before he could even process that and try to wake me up, the thud happened. Neither of us have any idea what that could have been. There was nothing around us or under the car from what we could see. And one thing that really bothered me was that I passed out. I had never had fainting spells prior to that night, but that scared me enough that I did. It hasn't happened to me since, thankfully, but when I get really stressed out or scared, which isn't often besides the little jump scares here and there, I start to wonder if I'll pass out again. So, we both questioned what the hell it was that we witnessed. They were in the road, which would obviously get anyone's attention. They quickly stood up, or screaming, and were able to run long enough to catch up with us. We both are firm believers that there are things out there, creatures, unknowns, whatever you want to call them, that we know nothing about. And we both wonder, with their speed and warped face, was this something trying to pretend to be a human? Has anyone ever heard of something like that? We haven't told a lot of people about this, just a few friends, those that we know that would believe us or take us seriously. But I swear on everything that everything I just recounted happened. And I still don't know how to explain it. All I know is that now I'm terrified to go down that road late at night, and nearly have a panic attack when I see someone on the side of the road. I wanted to tell you about this guy that I used to work with a few years back. I was working at a small tech repair shop. We had customers that would come in off the streets for repairs, but most of the company's profits were from larger corporations. They basically outsourced their repair jobs to us as an official name-brand repair company. The job itself was pretty easy, and I enjoyed it. I was one of the repair guys in the back, so I hardly even had to deal with the customers. I just had to make sure that I could repair the problems by the deadlines. Some companies and jobs were really strict with their 2-day turnaround time and such. So, anyways, the company was on a hiring spree to get a few more techs in there, and that's when Jeremy was hired on. Not going to lie, he was a bit of an oddball from the beginning, but he seemed cool. Just off. He was a scrawny fellow, usually walked around with his shoulders hunched over, and long hair that was typically in his face. When you talked to him, he would slowly look up and have to move his hair to even see you. And when I say, when you talked to him, that was typically how a conversation started with Jeremy. You talked to him. He rarely talked to any of us or initiated a conversation. Several of us would be sitting around the larger workbench, working and talking, and we had individual spaces. Not quite an office or cubicle, but it was still our assigned, or I guess designated, spot. A few of us liked to work together at the bench so that we could talk and BS. Jeremy usually stuck to his own. I never had a problem with him and just thought that he was shy, reclusive, even, and just had a hard time meeting people. I mean, all of us there had some level of that in the beginning. And that's why we worked there, and not in some big-named electronics store fixing things. But over time, we all got along with each other. Something else I noticed about Jeremy was that he was a full-blown tech guy. I thought I knew my stuff, but he was good. I watched him one time carefully take apart a tower, lay all the pieces out on his mat, unplug all the delicate ribbon cables, get to the motherboard, and solder a problem piece. And he did this without breaking a sweat or hesitating. The motherboards were always daunting to me. I loved doing that stuff, but I always wanted somebody watching me with those. Not Jeremy, though. He didn't even have to list the parts, label anything, or remember their order. He just put it all back together like it was nothing. So, what I'm trying to say, the dude was talented. He knew what he was doing. But Jeremy had another talent. He was also an artist, I suppose. We would constantly have scraps that we typically recycled. The company probably got some kind of write-off for it, but who knows. Jeremy liked to use his, or ones that he would find, and turn them into sculptures. I've seen him turn a mess of tangled wires into what looked like a person melting or pulling themselves out of a puddle. I wasn't really sure. He made something else that looked like it was just one of those modern statues that you would find in home goods. It didn't have any real definition to it, or starting or end point, but he showed it to me as he caught me watching him. I told him it looked sick, despite not having a clue what fresh hell I was staring at. And then he was good at that stuff. I remember he looked at me and I swear I saw the smallest smirk form in the corner of his mouth. He gave me a quiet thanks and then went right back to it. Then, the next morning, I came in to a new surprise. There was a small figure on my desk. It looked like a two-headed dog snarling. No joke, this guy may have been a bit odd, but he was damn good at what he did. He was already at his desk and he asked me if I liked it, and I said yes, and he told me that it was for me. I told him thanks, and moved it to put it on my shelf with the other few things that I had on there. I don't know why exactly, but maybe it was just because I was nice to him, but he made me 2 more sculptures that he gave to me. Those ones were a bit more disturbing. One looked like a woman with tentacles or something coming out of her back. They were kind of shaped like wings, I guess. And the other one, it looked like a limbless body. So, just the torso and head of a man, and something was coming out of its stomach. I don't know. I don't have them anymore, so it's hard to describe it from memory, but it was pretty freaky looking. He was watching me as I looked them over, so I once again thanked him and put them on the shelf, shoving the torso guy a little further back when he wasn't looking. So, that was Jeremy. Kind of weird, kind of a creepy art style to him, but it was something that I could live with. Easy. But then he came in one day and talked a little more with me. I was writing up a parts list for ones that we were low on, or specific ones that I needed, when I started getting that feeling of being watched. I spun around in my chair and Jeremy was standing there, again, shoulders hunched over, staring at me through strands of hair. He said, "Hey," and I did the same, but when he didn't speak after that, I asked him if there was something he needed. Then he said something so terrifying in such a calm and monotone voice. "Nah, I was just gonna say, I was gonna bring my piece in here and blow everyone away, but you're actually pretty cool, so I'm not gonna." Then he tried to smile, but it just seemed like someone didn't understand what smiling was, so his lips were just pulled back. And honestly, how does anyone respond to that? So I tried smiling back and said something stupid like, "Thanks, man. You're cool too." He nodded and then turned and shuffled off to his area, leaving me shell-shocked at my desk. I was too nervous to do anything. I could barely focus on my work, and I watched every time I saw Jeremy walk around. The worst part was, I didn't know who I should tell about it. The thought was out there now, and he claims he wasn't going to do it, but what if that was a lie? What if that was him hinting to me to get out before something happened, because he wanted to spare me? But then, what if I report it, they go back to him, and then he comes to find me specifically? As the question swirled in my head, I knew that meant that I wasn't safe. Not while that idea was out there. I told my girlfriend about it that night, and after contemplating everything, we both decided it would be best for me to find another job, ASAP, and possibly quit if anything seemed remotely off. I know many of you might think, why not just tell a manager or someone higher up? The problem with this was that my boss's boss was actually related to Jeremy. They were like cousins or something, I don't really remember, but I know that the cousin was kind of an ass, and I feared that they wouldn't take it seriously. But I knew that I at least needed to try because this was bad. So I did tell my boss. I caught him on his break out back while he was smoking and told him everything. I told him about the sculptures he made and what he said, and he actually did look concerned. He said that he would pass it along and see what they could do, but that was the last I ever heard of it. I did continue working there for a short period while I looked around. Jeremy continued to act like he normally would, but I felt like when he looked at me, it was as if we both knew something the others didn't, and it kind of made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't just continue working as if nothing was wrong, and act surprised when he suddenly goes Norman Bates on our asses, over any big or little thing. So I started telling people. I told my friends what he had said to me, not caring about the consequences, because I decided I was just going to quit. They deserved to know. They deserved to be warned and to be able to make their own decisions too. I didn't give a 2-week notice, but Jeremy did notice me packing up, and I told him that I found a better paying job. He said congrats and seemed to watch closely as I boxed my things up. I made sure to pack the sculptures before I left. I gave the torso one to my boss to say something isn't right with him, and I left. I found another job shortly after, and I never heard from Jeremy again. I would check the news and Facebook to see if anything ever happened, but nothing did. I was also friends with someone that worked there, and we've talked on occasion, and he tells me that he continued working there for quite some time. The big boss, his cousin, quit a few months later, and once he left, Jeremy seemed to open up a bit more. It was like the cousin made him more broody and creepy, but the important part was that nothing ever happened, which I am thankful for. I didn't feel comfortable returning there, even though they did pay better than the job I took afterwards, but I was relieved to hear that nothing ever happened. I just hope that Jeremy, wherever he is now, never acted on those thoughts. At the age of 4, my parents and I lived in an old apartment. I would see, at night, a tall, lanky shadow man wearing a top hat and a coat, trying to enter the room that we all slept in. Every night, I would be woken up by something shaking me awake as if it was urgent. Every night, I saw him always moving towards the door, but never quite close. We then moved to a new house, and I forgot about him. This is when I started to sleepwalk. My mother would just get up and direct me back into my room, but as soon as she touched me, I would wake up. I would be furious at her and tell her to stop and to let me go with him. Him? Yes, never mind, just let me go. And this conversation would happen once or twice a week. Again, we moved to a new city, and my sleepwalking got worse. I got up one night, put on my shoes, and I went to the door. My eyes were halfway closed and I could see him in the distance guiding me to come with him. This shadow man was guiding me to the road. I had barely made it to the driveway when my father grabbed me and guided me back to my room. Again, I was furious. The following night, the shadow man appeared in my room. He was inside. All those years of him walking to the door, and now he was finally inside my room. And then he disappeared. And that's when my brother started seeing the crawling woman. He's 7 years younger than me, and I've never told him about the shadow man. He'd also never seen a scary movie at that point of his life. He told me that every time he closes his eyes, the woman would crawl closer to him. We had our parents get holy water and bless the house. We moved 3 years ago to the current house that we live in. I'm 19 now and I haven't slept walked since then. But just a few months ago, I saw him. He was standing next to my bed, and he was bent over it, next to my face. I can't make out his features, but I could sense his smile. I haven't seen him now, but just last night I swear I saw a few shadows outside of my window. Now, I know that we move a lot. Believe me, I hate it. But we are moving to our final house. I say final because we're actually buying the place, but I'm scared that the shadows will follow. This was the summer of 1975. My brother and sister and I flew to Connecticut to spend the summer with our father. I was 11, my sister was 13, and my brother was 5. My dad and stepmother had rented a small house in a little fishing borough named Stonington. The little house used to be a garage that sat behind the main house. It only had 2 bedrooms. My sister and I shared a double bed in a small bedroom, along with our half-sister that slept in a crib. We spent the days exploring the little town and making new friends, not really spending much time indoors until the streetlights would come on. A few nights after arriving, I told my sister that I was having some trouble with my dreams. She said that I was probably just homesick, and to let it go. This night in particular, it was my turn to shut off the bedroom light, which consisted of standing by the door with my hand on the switch, focusing on my spots next to the wall, hitting the switch and running to the bed and jumping in as quickly as possible. As mentioned, I slept on the wall side of the bed, and my sister had the outside spot closest to the door. We chatted for a few minutes about our day before I rolled over to face the wall and fall asleep, and she rolled over to face the door. At some point during the night, I was in a dream, but I can't remember the details, because what happened next woke me from a deep sleep in an instant. A force of some sort had landed in the middle of our bed, rolling both of us over to face each other. We didn't even have to move a muscle. We stared at each other for a second before sitting upright, staring at the ceiling. At the exact same time, we both said, "That was an old hag." We both knew somehow that this hag had fallen straight out of the ceiling and landed right in the middle of the bed with enough force to flip us towards each other. Also, we didn't see her with our own eyes, but we both said what she was wearing, a long black cloak that looked like wings. Like we both saw the same thing in our mind's eye of what actually happened. A hole opening up in the ceiling, and the hag dropping straight down onto the bed. It was not our first time experiencing the paranormal, and also was not the last. But it was definitely one of the most memorable encounters that still confuses me to this day, because of the power that it had to actually move us from a dead sleep. I want to start this story with an apology, as I, the author, am not the best storyteller. Anyway, this story starts in early June of 2023. The first strange happening was my girlfriend, who we'll call Summer for this story, kept hearing my voice calling her name even though I was asleep. She even went as far as waking me up to make sure I wasn't messing with her. We thought that it was strange, but we put it to the side because I and my parents have lived in this house for 22 years with no strange things happening. The next weekend, Summer heard her name being called, but this time it was from my mom's voice. At that same time, my dad was downstairs watching TV when he heard my mom's voice calling his name as well. He also swore that he saw a woman's leg with a red slipper kind of peeking from behind the doorway. Nobody in this house has red slippers. Now that we are properly weirded out, we start paying more attention to things. A week after that, I heard my name being called by Summer from her own room. I had asked her over text if she had said my name, and she said no. She thought I was in her room because she felt something graze her leg. She flipped the lights on and nothing was there. My dad wakes up to go to work at 4 in the morning. He left for work, and when he was gone, my mom heard her name being called by my dad's voice. Later that day, we had looked outside and made a shocking discovery. We went outside and about 4 of the 6 large potted plants were knocked over, but the small potted plants were not touched. Our 50-pound bird bath was knocked over as well. This part is weird. We have another bird bath mounted about 6 feet on our fence, with a hummingbird feeder hanging from under it. Somehow, the hummingbird feeder was on top of the bird bath. The feeder that was once hooked and hanging from the bird bath was now just placed on top of said bird bath. But that's not all. Our garden has a small gate that is latched shut. Somehow the gate had become unlatched, but none of the food in our garden was touched. Things went quiet for a month or two, when Summer and I were in the room with my dog. The door was shut and my mom was downstairs. My dog started barking and freaking the hell out at my door. When I got up, the door flew open silently, and the light to my mom's room was on. Now, my mom is very persistent about lights being on in the house, if you're not in that room, so we know that it wasn't her. My dad was gone from the house, my mom was downstairs, and Summer and I were in my room. Again, everything was silent until the beginning of March. It started with me letting my dog in from outside, and as soon as I sat down, I heard my cat calling from outside to be let in. She has such a high-pitched meow that I've never heard on any other cats, so it was undoubtedly her. Summer and I laughed about it, saying how many more animals are outside. When I got up to open the door and let her in, nothing. It was silent. I thought, weird, I'll go check the garage, I guess, because sometimes she hangs out in there. I opened the door, nothing. My mom then comes out of the bathroom upstairs and sees our cat just sitting in front of the bathroom. Summer and I are dumbfounded. We asked my mom if she had meowed at all, and my mom said that she had been silent. Summer and I went to bed with an uneasy feeling. Now, the last strange happening, and quite frankly the most scary. Summer and I were hanging out in my room. We had stayed up until about 1 or 2 in the morning on a Saturday. On a side note, most of the doors in my house don't latch shut. They close all the way, but you can just push them open because the land is always shifting. Now that you know that, unless my mom's window is open and my windows are open, the doors will open and shut by themselves from the breeze. My door opens inward, and across from my door is my window. I had my window cracked for some fresh air when my door opened. I thought, okay, no big deal. My mom has her window open, as that's the only way that my door will open and shut by itself. To confirm my suspicion, I popped my head into my mom's room to see her window closed. We thought that was pretty weird, but no big deal. I'll just put both of my steel-toed boots in front of my door. We gave it about 5 seconds, and then the door opened. Really weird, we thought. I'll put 2 more shoes in front of the door. No, door still opened. Now that we're properly freaked out, I put a steel shooting target in front of the door that weighs about 10 pounds. Somehow, this door still opened. I then had enough of this ghost's shenanigans, or whatever it is, so I put the spare crankshaft from my car, which weighs 17 pounds. Somehow, this door still opened, so I put the spare rotor from a rotary engine against the door. With 35 pounds of metal against the door, it didn't open, but alongside the little gap in between the door and the door frame, I felt an outrageous breeze being blown. Way stronger than a person blowing, and it was very cold. And somehow, despite the 35 pounds being in front of that door, it was still wanting to open. The next morning, I had talked to my mom about it, and as we were talking, the beads I had around my doorknob just started to gently move back and forth. I'll give an update if anything else happens. Again, I'm not the best storyteller, but thank you for listening anyways. Hi, Raven. This is a paranormal story that I've never shared with anyone. I would never share this with my friends, family, or husband, as I'm an educated MD. I've had some paranormal events all my life, but I consider them all to be explained in one way or another. I do believe that we live in a matrix, and that this is the cause of most of all the paranormal. But this? I've been searching since it happened without any answers. This occurred about 10 years ago. My husband and I were taking a weekend away from the children to have some time together for our anniversary. I was a strict Christian in my beliefs at the time. I had no experience with meditation. On Friday night, we went out and had a good time as we usually do. My husband and I both work entirely too much. Although we had worked all day, we still went out for a meal and then headed back to the hotel. The next morning, we got up and went to the breakfast buffet. Following breakfast, we got back into the bed to cuddle. I was wanting to have more adult time, but he was very tired and sleepy. I wasn't sleepy. I laid there with my eyes closed in the darkness so he could rest. I felt like there was someone in the room. I saw a spiral in front of my eyes. It was like someone was talking to me, giving me instructions. It's not like I heard a voice. I don't have psychiatric problems. It's like I just knew what it was saying. I saw 11 points of light in the spiral. As I lay there, I was to follow the spiral forward and then back and forward. It was beautiful and calming, and this went on for a time. I then felt a warm sensation that I can't explain from the lower parts of my body. It was amazing. It then turned into an unexpected release of tension. I don't want to be too graphic, but I had to continue to follow the spiral during the entire encounter as I was directed. It was as if something bad or wrong would happen if I didn't do as I was told. It was then over with an amazing ending. I was so relaxed. I quickly told myself that my husband must be awake and that he had touched me. I must have been just talking to myself. I then noticed his slight, soft snoring. I felt something press against my right upper thigh, and I don't know how to say this, but it was not my husband. As soon as this occurred, it was over. I didn't feel the presence in the room. My husband woke, and we just continued with our weekend. These encounters are always said to be demons that are evil, but this wasn't evil, and I did not feel ashamed. Maybe I should have been ashamed. I just never spoke of it. It has not happened again, and since then, I've been more open to paranormal events. I can actually still draw the spiral and all of its points. Perhaps I slipped into a parallel universe where he wasn't sleeping? What do you think? Hi. I'm a 37-year-old mom who has 3 kids. I'm going to give them fake names to identify them here. Ian is 7, Lila's 10, and Steven is 15. Since I work the night shift and the occasional weekend, while my husband works throughout the week, it's up to me to do the school run in the morning and in the afternoon. Not to mention get my kids ready for school in the morning, but usually it isn't too much stress. The morning was the same as we had done so many times before. The kids protested and finally got in the car. There were more cars on the road, the crossing was slow, and it was bumper to bumper, so to speak. Where I live is notoriously safe and boring. It's the kind of community where you can pretty much leave your front door unlocked and not have to worry about anyone stealing anything. The kids were annoying each other, and over the car radio I heard screaming from the cars up ahead of me. I looked out my window and saw a man shouting. He held something long in his hand that I couldn't quite make out at first. He looked like he was going to try to hit the window. Some of the cars in front of me pulled out a line in order to get away. I turned the radio down, and the kids finally put their phones away to see what was happening. There were more of them. Several men walking with baseball bats, and they started breaking car windows, damaging the cars, and screaming at people. I reached for my phone to call the police, got through to them, and I started telling them what was happening and that they needed to get there quickly. They came up to me, pointed a bat at me, and started screaming. I couldn't quite understand what he was saying to me, but I remember he told me to stop and get out of the car. There was no way I was going to do that. I have a feeling that he knew I was on the phone with the police. My kids were screaming at me to drive away, and I pulled out of the line, nearly crashing into another car, and to the man who was threatening us. Both the other car and I blew our horns. It was loud and chaotic. I sped away, but I know I didn't hit him. I don't know what I would have done if I actually hurt somebody. One of the men further down the road raised the bat at my car and hit it below the rear side window. I don't know who screamed louder when it happened, me or the kids. We drove down the road and I didn't feel safe enough to risk trying to drop the kids off. We saw more of them walking around that road. They looked at our car a little too intently, but ultimately didn't do anything to us. I didn't want to risk them following me home, and I really needed to get away. I drove the kids around the neighboring suburb, hoping that the police had come and done their job. I called my husband and told him what had happened. He was tempted to leave work to make sure that we were safe. They did eventually come and make arrests. And after a bit, it came out that one of the local dads had owed a lot of money to one of the bigger town's local gangs, and since they couldn't find him to get it back, they had decided to threaten his wife and kids, and anyone else that was there as witnesses. Pretty messed up if you ask me. I don't know what else happened to them or if he finally ended up paying them back. I haven't seen any of them on the road since. I keep thinking about what I would do if I saw them again. I imagine that I would just run them over, not that it would help the situation. I've become a bit of a nervous driver since then, and any loud sounds tend to set me off. I get nervous now in a lot of traffic, so we now try to leave earlier to avoid it. My kids hate that. We've gotten into the routine of going different routes in order to get to the school, or when we leave in the afternoon. One of the kids thought that it was exciting when it happened, and then said that he should be homeschooled instead, but my husband and I decided to keep them in the school. The community was pretty angry that they came over and attacked mums with kids over it, and I don't think they have many friends in my small town. But other than that, I've lived a pretty boring life with nothing else that's really happened. I don't typically comment on your videos, Raven, but I do listen to all of them. Thanks for doing them for us. They help me get through my day. If you use my story, it's going to definitely make my day. So thanks, Raven. Thank you for submitting it. I was working at this accounting firm a few years back. It was a nice little company, close-knit, and I really did enjoy working there. However, I had a great opportunity to start a small firm as a partnership with a friend of mine. They all congratulated me and were very supportive of my decision, which made it a little easier on me. They did ask me to give them an extra week, so 3 weeks total. That way they could get a replacement in for me. That also meant that I would be helping with training them, which was also totally fine by me. Since I was going to be working with my friend and not a large corporation, I did have a little more flexibility. They knew my plans for some time now, so they were already in the hiring process and going through interviews. They hired a man named Greg, and when he was introduced to me by our mutual boss, he seemed nice and well-mannered. He shook my hand, he had a warm smile, and the small talk seemed to come naturally. I thought that he felt like a good fit. But as the training went on and the days passed, I started to notice some weird behaviors about Greg. First, he carried around a small notepad and pen everywhere. When I would show him how to use certain software, he would whip out that little pad and start to write stuff down. I assumed he was taking notes, little key points on things to click on, where to look for X, Y, or Z, etc. I was impressed by this because he seemed really engaged, and he made me confident that they had found a good replacement. But then he was taking notes in weird places, such as while he was sitting on a bench in the lounge room. People would walk by and he would watch them intently, like he was studying them, and then he would write something down in his notepad. I saw him do this many times while I was in the lounge having lunch, but then I caught him standing outside the restrooms doing the same. Both restrooms were next to each other, and they had 4 stalls in each. Even on lunch breaks, the restrooms weren't busy enough that you had to wait outside, especially the men's. So it kind of stood out to me. I was at the small kitchenette, which is where the vending machines, fridge, and coffee maker were, when I saw him quickly walk in the direction of the restrooms. Being nosy, I poked my head out to see where he was going. As suspected, he was pacing near the restrooms. The kitchenette was also next to them, so I could hear him mumbling something. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it almost seemed like a full conversation. I could hear the upward inflections. I could make out the no, as he disagreed with himself. I watched him point his pen up like he had just remembered something, like an aha moment. As I continued watching, Pam walked out of the restroom and she smiled at him. In return, Greg seemed like he was startled or didn't anticipate running into someone, and he sort of pulled his shoulders up and scurried away, like he'd been caught. It was really odd, and I didn't know what to think of it. The notes and mumbling continued. He would write things down as a woman left the restroom, and if someone tried to talk to him or acknowledge his presence, he would walk off. He wasn't doing anything else, but it was still really odd, and I really wanted to know what on earth he could have been writing down. I know it was wrong of me to want to do this, but I even tried to see if I could see the notepad sitting on his desk, but he never left it alone. Ever. It was always on him, no matter where he went, even when he went home. Other than the odd note-taking and mumbling, another thing I experienced was when I came in a little later than normal. I had a bit of a snafu at home, which made me run behind, so when I got in, I went straight to my desk to set up. But as I rounded the corner, I saw Greg at my desk, gently shuffling through my items. I didn't want to become defensive or seem suspicious, even though I had every right to. So I kept my normal chipper tone and said something like, "Morning, Greg. Did I forget to give you yesterday's forms?" He quickly stood up straight, made eye contact with me for only a second, before looking away. I could see his eyes shifting wildly. obviously trying to come up with something. I've experienced the same thing from my 8-year-old. He softly mumbled something about trying to find a pen and walked away back to his desk. Our desks had their own little spaces with a divider between each of them. Our desks had us back to back. So I watched him walk back to his own and pull out his notepad and his pen. So it was pretty obviously a lie. But then the question goes back to, why was he going through my desk? My drawers were locked, because it had confidential information in it, but my desk itself mostly had personal items. A small plant, a picture of my son and husband, sticky notes, and small trinkets. The stuff that you would normally see on a desk. So even if he did need a pen, they were pretty obviously sitting in the open, in my pen holder. He avoided me for most of that day afterwards. The last event that I experienced was on the second to last day there. I was working late that night, trying to copy and import the last of my documents, my work, and data to a drive for our VP, as the next day I had to go over the last of it with her. I wanted to finish it that night, so that way I didn't have to rush and stress on my last day there. I wanted it to go smoothly. That way the rest of my day could be a little more relaxed and I could just enjoy my last day with them. It was still kind of bittersweet for me. My desk was at the end of the row, closest to the window, by choice, so I typically didn't notice people coming and going. I also had a small desk mirror that I kept on the side for that reason. I could see people coming up from behind me because certain people liked to sneak up on me. All in fun, though. That mirror was packed up, so I couldn't see what was going on unless I looked or heard something. I thought that I was alone. It was close to 8 p.m., and most people were long gone at that time, so I had music playing on my phone turned down so as to not be obnoxious with it. I guess I was pretty zoned out in my work, and the music, that I didn't notice the sighing and typing until there was a break in the music between songs. I was curious who was still there, so I turned around and stood up to check. I could just barely see his shoulder, but it was Greg. I didn't know why he was still there. He didn't have a real project assigned to him yet, and definitely didn't have a deadline, so there was no reason for him to be there that late. Yes, it was probably more just me being nosy, but I wanted to see what he was up to. I stood close to the divider and looked over it, being careful not to touch it and make it wiggle. Greg had his notepad sitting on his desk next to his left hand. The lights were off, so it was just the one emergency light that always stays on, but it was in the middle of the aisle, so it didn't really light up our desks. The light from his screen was doing most of the work. The only thing that I could make out on the notepad was a bunch of quickly and crudely scribbled words. Some things were crossed out, and there were 3 things bulleted, but again, I couldn't quite read it. His screen, however, was in what looked like a Word document, and it was all in the same paragraph. He scrolled up, and it just seemed to go on and on. I'm pretty sure I saw at least 4 page breaks. I knew his work duties. I was there when they were assigned to him by our VP, because it was similar to what I was already doing. I never had to write up any kind of long report, at least not like that in a Word document. But the kind of, I guess, creepier part for me was what else was on the screen. He would switch over to another browser, and the tabs were so small that you could tell there were tons of them. And every single tab seemed like a different stock photo of a woman in professional business attire. Women in pencil skirts and matching suit jackets. Women sitting in the chair with their legs crossed. Women smiling at the camera, arms crossed. Hair up in a bun or straight down resting on their shoulder. He would look at them like he was studying them for several seconds. Then he would mumble something and go back to the Word document. I was at a loss. What on earth was he doing? I'm not sure why, but it made me really uncomfortable. This was definitely a professional setting, business casual. Some ladies wore something similar, some of us leaned more onto the casual side, but regardless, why did he have all of these pictures up? And why was he focusing so hard on them? To be honest, I was too freaked out to even confront him about it. I just adjusted in my seat so I could look back and forth between my screen and towards Greg's desk. I watched the copy progress and pleaded with it to finish up. After what felt like hours, it finally did. I had everything ready to go, my coat on, purse on my shoulder, phone in hand, ready to just eject the drive, lock my computer, and take off. I even walked around the windows just to avoid walking around him. Some of us women felt Greg was a little odd. I shared what I had witnessed these past few weeks, and others agreed that it was weird, but we also had no explanation for his actions. My only thought at that point was I told them everything I saw and how it was strange. I was gone after that following day, so it was no longer my problem. If he didn't pay attention to what I taught him, because of the weird stuff that he was doing, or if he did something worse, that's on them. They'd been warned. Fast forward a month or two later, I'm now in my new position, still there today actually, and I love it. But one day when I went to grab coffee, I ran into one of my old coworkers. We started chatting, when she suddenly gasped and asked me if I had heard about Greg. I said no, and what she told me really creeped me out, and confirmed some of my suspicions about him. About 2 to 3 weeks after I left, he had been fired. One day, Greg was caught going into the women's restroom and pulling something out from under the sink. He apparently didn't check if there was anyone in the stalls, but fortunately, and unfortunately, the CFO was in there as she had been working late that day as well. She watched him pull something off and walk out. She quickly followed him as he went back to his desk and was looking down, like at his lap, holding a device. She confronted him about it, and at first he denied it, as if she couldn't see him holding something, and then he finally confessed. She demanded that he give it to her, and he finally did. She tried asking what he was doing, and all that he would say was that it wasn't a camera. And that's all he would say. She told him to go home, and the next day she spoke to the powers that be, and he was, of course, fired. It walked out that same day. The coworker was pretty close friends with the CFO, and she worked in the HR department, so she pretty much knew firsthand what had happened. The CFO said that it actually wasn't a camera, but it was an audio recorder, which I guess that's better. I don't even want to think about what he was recording, or trying to record. It was creepy, and gross. No one knows what happened to him after that, and it creeps me out to think about. Who knows where he could be working now, and whether he's done that prior or is still trying to do it today. I guess I can only hope that that was the only time. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to you for the last 6 months, and I'm really grateful for your podcast. I've perused this subreddit a lot, but haven't posted until now. A lot of paranormal and supernatural stuff has happened my whole life, but none has really stuck out to me like this one. For context, my family has a lot of people who can sense spirits, or have had similar experiences. It sounds strange, but on both sides of my family, I have had relatives who are intensely superstitious, or very in touch with their spiritual side, if that makes sense. My brother and I have had strange experiences for our whole lives, but perhaps we're just observant or perceptive to weird things. This one seemed different to me, though. 2 months ago, my grandmother passed away at around 3 a.m. She lived in Georgia, and I live in Massachusetts, 1,000 miles away. I haven't talked to her in years because she had dementia and was not very lucid most of the time. Her health had seriously declined, and she was essentially on hospice care at my uncle and aunt's house, where she lived. The night that she passed, I was watching The X-Files. I've watched this show since I was a kid, but I really only watched and rewatched seasons 1 through 6, because that's what we owned on DVD. Even since I've gotten older and have had access to multiple streaming services where I could watch the rest of the series, I just never did. I've basically rewatched the series at least 2 to 3 times, and have watched some episodes more than 10 times, just to put it into perspective. Anyways, for some reason, a few months ago, I decided to continue the series from Season 7 on. This may have a spoiler, so if you're planning on watching the show, don't read it. I think it's been enough time to allow spoilers. However, the episode that I watched that night was about someone dying, but it was very melancholy and somewhat hopeful. I believe it was Season 7, Episode 17. Without giving much away, this episode has an intense focus on collective unconscious and souls, and is super existential. What was weird was that I never stayed up that late watching TV, and this night I stayed up past 2 or 3 just to finish this episode, one that I had never seen before. I remember feeling strange after watching it. Kind of sad, but also peaceful. Exhausted, since it was hours past my usual bedtime, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call from my dad. I already knew what he would say when I called him back. Once he picked up, he said that it was the call. The one everyone is anxiously waiting for when someone is on their deathbed. And said that she had passed at around 3 a.m. that night. Perhaps it is just coincidental, but I can't help but think how weird it is that I happened to stay up that late that night. That I happened to decided to continue watching a series randomly one day, and that the last episode I watched before going to bed, around the same time my grandmother passed, was a very emotional one about the fear of losing someone you love. But let me know what you think. First, a big thank you. I've always had difficulty sleeping at night. Well, sleeping in general. Anyway, I find your voice and your stories very comforting, and there have been more than a few nights that I've put on my headphones and listened to your stories to fall asleep. Thank you. Also, thank you to the people who send in stories because it's really important, and I think that we actually should talk about these things. Anyway, I've always loved the idea of the paranormal, even as an atheist. I'm no longer an atheist, but that's neither here nor there for these stories, because I'll tell them as they happened, and you can figure out for yourself what you want to think about them. The first story is about me, and I was pregnant and driving the car. My mom was in the seat next to me, and in Texas, we call that shotgun. Maybe you all do everywhere, but maybe not. Anyway, in the back seat were my toddler and my 5-year-old. We were on our way to have a really fun day at a petting zoo called Old MacDonald's Farm. So we were singing songs and we were having a good time as we were traveling along the highway. At one point we stopped to get some lunch, because it was a little bit of a drive. And as I pulled out, I was T-boned. And if you don't know what that is, I'll tell you. I was pulling into a major highway. I was turning left, but there was a turn lane in the middle of the highway, which was 2 lanes wide. So as I was waiting in the turn lane for traffic to finish, a car came toward me driving in the turn lane at a high speed. There were so many cars in front of me and it happened so fast. There was nothing I could do to avoid the car hitting my side, and my toddler who was behind me in her car seat. Of course, the people on the other side of my car, my mother and my 5-year-old, were also impacted, especially since the other car was going 60 plus miles per hour. When we finally landed, or when the car stopped, a lot of people surrounded our vehicles. I distinctly remember hearing a woman screaming and others crying. Surprisingly, nobody in the car was crying or screaming. Maybe we were just stunned. Or sometimes, I think maybe we were protected. Because this is what happened next. The woman screaming said these words. Oh my god, the baby's eyes, her eyes, they're bleeding. She has glass in her eyes. She's going to be blind. As you can imagine, my heart stopped. The thing is, the car was crumpled around us and I could not move out of my seat. My seatbelt was tied around my chest and I couldn't even turn to move around. I was about 8.5 months pregnant as well. I'm fairly short and small, so my belly wasn't very huge in comparison to the rest of me. The next thing that happened was I heard another woman's voice in my head, and it was very calm, and she said, "Your baby does not have glass in her eye. She's fine, and everything's going to be okay. Everybody's fine." And I had a very calm feeling come over me all of a sudden. I just felt a sense of well-being and a sense of everything is fine. It was okay. And I told everybody in the car that I said we were fine and that everything was okay. We were helped out of our vehicle and we were sitting in a grassy knoll with a lot of other people who had come to help. It was a huge crowd because it was in front of a shopping center. Anyway, when the ambulance drivers and the police officers came, they wanted to know where the people that were in that car were, and they pointed to my vehicle that was crumpled beyond recognition. We told them, and the people in the crowd said they're right here and pointed to us, and we raised our hands as we were sitting on the knoll, and still kind of stunned. We said, "That's us, we were in that car." Then, the emergency technician said, "No, not you guys, the people in that car." And they named the make and model of the car. My car. The car that I was in. It took convincing them that we had come out of that car because they said they were looking for bodies. They said they were looking for dead people. That's what they expected after seeing the vehicle. Even so, they made us get on boards and loaded us up into the ambulance and took us to the hospital. The sheriff of the town insisted that we do so. So, if you don't know already, the incredible part of the story to me is that voice and the calming feeling. Oh, and I guess I didn't say this part, but everybody was fine. Not one person had a broken bone or even a bruise. Now, I will say that the toddler had been hit with a piece of glass very near her eye, and she did have a cut that was bleeding. It did look scary, so I wouldn't blame anybody for their reaction at the time. And here's the second story. And this one takes place in an old house that was built in the early 1900s. Mostly wood floors. A beautiful home. There are a few things to this story that are odd, or should I say, quite odd. So at the time I lived in this house, I lived with my partner, we'll call her Sue, and our 4 children. There was a park across the street from the house, and we visited it a lot. Many people would ask if we were the people that lived in that house, and they saw us coming from there. They would always ask who that lady was in the window that always watched the street and the park. There was no lady that lived at the house that matched their description. They said that she rocked in a rocking chair. I will say that I did hear a creaking sound in that room. It did sound like a rocking chair fairly often. But when you're in a big old house, sounds are always kind of funny, and so you really kind of just don't pay attention that much, unless it's mentioned. The kids could see her ghost that looked out onto the street, and I did see her shadow once, but I fancied that maybe I just had a vivid imagination. At least that's what I thought at the time. At any rate, the kids said that her name was Helen. To tell you the truth, One of the other things that I often heard, especially when I was downstairs or upstairs in my room, with the door closed, I could often hear somebody sweeping the floor out in the hallway, pacing and sweeping and pacing and sweeping. But again, these old houses, they make a lot of echoing sounds. They have high ceilings and you just kind of hear a lot of noises anyways. So I never really was afraid or anything. But let me say this, I'm not a very overbearing parent. I definitely love my children, but I wasn't the type of mother that had to check on them anytime I got up at night, or anything like that. I did know they were in bed, and I did look in on them before I went to bed at night, and this night was no different. And this is the setup. It was kind of funny because one of my kids really wanted to sleep in this small space that was meant to be a closet, but it actually had a little window to the outside in it. It was a little small room with a doorway, off of a large bedroom, where their siblings slept. The bedroom did contain another closet that we used as a closet as it didn't have a window. I took the door off of my child's space because I couldn't bear the thought of them being in there all closed up in that small space. They were about 10 years old. Their siblings slept in the actual bedroom space. They each had their own bed, one on the other side of the room, and when I checked on them, they were all sleeping, and so I went to bed. It was winter time, and this old house had these old gas heaters that had these bricks in them. They would heat the room. The heater was connected to the wall with a tube that the gas went through to fuel the flame that heated the room. It was the kind of heater that my grandparents had in their homes, and it was the kind of heater that I'd had in my home growing up sometimes, so it didn't really dawn on me that it could be as dangerous as it actually turned out to be. In the middle of the night one night, I heard my name. It was said in a very firm voice, and it was the same voice that I'd heard right after the car accident. And she said, "Carmen, get up. Carmen, get up and go check on the children." I got up immediately. I went across the hall to my children's room, and as I walked into the room and turned to check on the 10-year-old in the small closet space, I watched as the tube connected to the heater somehow failed. It was as if someone had a blowtorch and they were blowing it across the doorway where my 10-year-old was sleeping. The flames shot across the doorway, about 6 to 8 inches off of the floor. Luckily, we had a fire plan and we had actually practiced it for homework on a school project for one of the kids. And so, as I ran into the closet and pulled my 10-year-old out, jumping over the flames, watching as they caught the curtains on fire, at the same time yelling to the kids to run to the park, yelling to my partner to grab the fire extinguisher, grabbing my phone and calling 911. Within seconds, as I was leaving the room, I could already see the flames licking at the ceiling. My partner, Sue, put the fire out before the firemen got there. All of this happened within seconds, maybe minutes, and the small closet and part of the bedroom were consumed in that small amount of time. If I hadn't heard that voice wake me up, I would not have had all 4 of my children. I may even have died in that fire. Anyway, the landlord updated the heating and added a ladder outside of each bedroom that we could throw down in the event of an emergency. So, that's the story. And some might think that she's a guardian angel. Some might think that she is just me being very intuitive somehow, or there may be other explanations. At any rate, that's just part of my story. Living in that house was pretty interesting, I must say. Again, thank you for your stories and the nice way that you read them. Lots of love. Thank you. I have never been close with either of my grandmas. Not that I want to be anyways, but the stories I've heard of them have left me with chills. This all happened in Mexico. At the age of 28, my grandma had 3 kids already, and my grandpa and her were happily married. There was a woman in that village who hated her, and it was known around there that the mother of this woman was a witch. They wanted to bewitch my grandpa to fall in love with her and to leave my grandma. This didn't work and made the witch sick for a while. Now you may ask, why didn't the curse work? Was she not strong or good enough? No, she was good. But there was something she didn't know about my grandfather. His veins were in the form of a cross. Now, I'm not very religious, but he is. He couldn't be cursed. He couldn't be touched by a curse. So, the curse went to my grandma. She fell ill and could not get up. She seemed to almost turn to stone. My mother was around 5 and remembered everything. She said that my grandma would have her fists tightly shut, and one time they were able to open her hand, only to find dirt falling off of her hands. She was described as looking like a corpse. They took her to countless doctors and then felt desperate, and decided to take her to a different witch. This witch took her into a room. A few minutes later, he came back running and telling my grandfather that she was possessed. He said that it was going to take a while, but he could help them. He went back into the room, and that's where a loud boom erupted from said room. "Let me stay," it screamed, and he responded with, "This body doesn't belong to you. Leave." They went back and forth, arguing until all my grandfather heard was his own breathing. Minutes later, my grandma walked out of the room as if nothing had happened. She was well, and she remembered everything. This story happened around 12 years or so ago, and it was kind of a nothing happened sort of event, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't scary when it did happen. I used to have some friends that lived out in the middle of nowhere, and I would spend the weekend out at their place sometimes when the weather was nice. We used to do a lot of stupid stuff back then, when I was there, and since they lived in a secluded area, we could be as dumb and loud as we wanted. Of course, because they lived so far out, I had to drive for a few hours, both ways, every time. It was worth it, though. But driving for that long, you're bound to eventually experience something bizarre. I was about 25 minutes down the old 2-lane highway heading to my buddy's house on that Friday evening, when I spotted something a bit up the way in my headlights. Now, I would see trash and other random detritus on the side of the road pretty regularly, but this wasn't just a random piece of junk. It looked like a dress. Like a full-on pink sundress hanging onto a tree branch over the road. Like the wind had blown it upwards and it got caught. Normally this wouldn't have mattered to me. I would have just laughed at it and kept on. But I noticed that this pretty little dress was covered in what looked like red stains. Like blood. And it didn't really look old or browned. It was still fairly vividly red. I stopped the truck and got out to look, and I was pretty well certain that whoever this dress belonged to had been attacked in some way. The fabric was torn or cut, but I couldn't tell if it was by a knife or claws, and it was drenched in what I was 99% certain was blood. Unfortunately, the dress was too high up for me to get it down, and there was nothing I could do to get it. At this point, I was looking around to see if there was someone that had been attacked by a bear or wolf or something, and was bleeding out. But there was nobody around, and it was completely silent. I figured the best course of action was to call the police and report it, since this could be a serious situation. I reached in to grab my phone and make the call, and my battery was completely dead. Being this far out, there's no service, so my battery would drain because it was constantly looking for a tower to connect to, and of course I didn't have my charger in my truck. I cursed at myself for my lack of foresight and decided to just gun it to my friend's house and call the cops there. So that's what I did. I went way too fast to get there, and I made it way quicker than I should have. When I got there, I frantically told him about what I'd seen, and he had the same thoughts that I had. That some poor girl had been attacked by a bear out in the woods, and was either bleeding out or beyond help. I ended up calling the cops and reporting what I had seen, and the approximate location, and I told the dispatcher that we would drive back to where I found it and they could meet us there. We drove out to the spot, and the dress was still hooked into the trees, thankfully. I didn't have to do too much explaining, other than tell them that I was driving and saw it and that I hadn't heard anyone in the area when I stopped earlier. And they thanked me for reporting it because it was definitely odd. They also asked me for my information, just in case they had any more questions. So, I gave it to them, and they took over from there. We got back to my buddy's house, and it was honestly on my mind for the entire weekend. Obviously, they never did contact me, and I bugged my friend to see if there was any information. It was a small town area, and if anything happened, people talked. But there were never any updates. Whatever happened pretty much remained a mystery. Obviously, it could have been nothing, but I'm damn near certain that dress was covered in actual blood that was still fairly fresh. It was nowhere near Halloween, so I'm doubting it was a costume or anything. Though, I guess someone could have just wanted to do a horror photo shoot out in the woods, and I guess maybe it got freaky and they lost their clothes or something. I don't know. Like I said, I know that nothing really happened in this story, but I honestly feel like this was the result of someone getting attacked by something or someone in the woods, and they just never found the body. I hope that's not the case, but I'm guessing that I'll never actually have the answer to whether or not it was. I took a nap yesterday after sending my son to school. I work evenings and hubby was already at work that morning, but in my dream I didn't realize I was dreaming. It wasn't until after I woke up that I realized it was a dream. So, it started off with me reading on my Kindle app while waiting to clock in for work. A gentleman with a kid got my attention to ask for assistance, when I looked up and realized I was not at work. I looked around and it was completely different. Instead of being a bright and open gym space, it was a dark warehouse-style building with an entirely different gym space. I was still wearing the clothes that I took a nap in. Leggings, sports bra, sweatshirt. And so I told the gentleman that I couldn't help him because I didn't work there. I left the building and looked around, and did not recognize any of my surroundings. I took out my keys and found my car. My car was still the same make and model as my current car, but instead everything was on the right side. I'm an American, so it's usually on the left. I get in my car and I'm freaking out because my son has a half day today, and I need to pick him up from school, and I don't recognize where I am. My phone still has the current background of my family, including pets, as the screensaver and lock screen. I could not determine the time based off of my phone. It was like it was kept from me, which I thought was super weird at the moment, but looking back now, I believe it's because it was a dream. I started driving around, but there was a bunch of one-way streets. I'm driving erratically, making wrong turns. I get out of the car to get directions, and people are talking to me and I don't understand them. I don't have service on my phone to be able to call or to pull up GPS, so I wander around to see if I can find service. I end up in this building where people are gathering for Bible study. They asked me if I was going to stay, and I told them that no, that I was lost and just needed to find service. I make my way back to my car, and I'm just sitting there confused. I still have no idea where I am. My husband then video calls me, and I'm flooded with relief as I answer. But it's not my husband, as I know him now. It's a younger, healthier version. He asked why I wasn't home. I asked what was going on, and I told him that I was lost and confused and panicking. That I didn't think I would be able to get our son in time. He gave me the strangest look and told me to just come home, that he was home from work early, and that we could talk about it. I told him that I didn't know where home was, so he sent me the address. I don't actually remember seeing the address or putting it in, and he was giving me a concerned look. Driving there was kind of a blur. I just followed the GPS. I remember seeing beautiful landscapes full of lush greenery, and just being overly awed by my beautiful surroundings. And concerned because back home it should be snowing. I get to the address that my husband sent me. I meet him inside and I ask him the year. He looks at me strangely and tells me that we are in our 30s, but very much did not answer the year question. But yes, we are currently in our 30s. I look around and notice that my dog isn't here, so I ask about her. He then tells me that we never had a dog, only cats. I looked at him and asked about our son. He looks at me utterly confused and states that we never had children. I start sobbing, like hysterically sobbing. I said no, that's not possible. I go on to tell him all about our son, his looks, likes, and how much we love him. He looks at me devastatedly and asks if I am okay. I tell him obviously not. He then said maybe I had a bad dream because we never had children, because I can't conceive. I show him the picture of our family, including the animals, from a Christmas ago that are on my phone. And now he looks utterly confused. He asked me where I got this picture, and I told him that I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And that is when I woke up. I was absolutely sobbing, hysterical, and having a panic attack. I immediately called my husband at work to talk to him, and then went and picked up my son from school and held him and talked to him while we cuddled on the couch with some hot chocolate. It is snowing here. Throughout the rest of the day, yesterday, I kept getting random bouts of deja vu and phantom pains of mourning and grieving. Like I knew something was wrong, somewhere. I would randomly start crying throughout the day. I had to go check on my son multiple times to make sure he was still there. It was a very mentally and emotionally draining day. Now, for a bit of background information, I was told from a young age that I would never have children of my own. I was assaulted as a child for years, and ended up having cervical cancer when I was 10. I was just told that it would be impossible to conceive. I have always struggled with PTSD, depression, and anxiety because of my childhood. I ended up pregnant with my son when I was 27. He was the most fabulous, unplanned surprise that has ever happened to us. I would not trade him for anything. But because of the pregnancy, I ended up with a lot of health issues. I was told now that I have a child, I cannot have any more children or it could physically kill me. I ended up being diagnosed bipolar, type 1, and found out that I had ADHD and Hashimoto's, among other things. My husband was in the military during this time, but after serving 10 years is now a disabled vet. We are currently in the process of buying our first home. We've been married 11 years and together for 15. My husband thinks, because of the hyper-realistic feel of the dream and how even now I can describe in full detail some of the landscapes that I was in, that I was dropped into, like, a parallel universe or something. I don't know what to think. All I do know, going off of these phantom pains of grieving and mourning that I'm still experiencing, is that I'm just messed up this other woman's life, if that's true. I don't know if I'm looking for advice or for people with similar experiences. I just needed to share it somewhere, so why not Reddit? So, I'm 21 years old, and my brother is 23. I don't know if this is needed for context, but I live with my parents due to health reasons, and my brother lives with our grandma. We were moving around this time, and I knew that our house was haunted a little. Both me and my mom are both very into spiritual and Wiccan aspects, or culture, and if anyone doesn't know what that means, it's like connecting spirituality to life, nature, and some practicing of witchcraft. Saying this, we don't do much witchcraft, only to help others or bless an area, thing, or place. I've been able to speak and see ghosts as long as I can remember. My mom has only been able to feel their presence. Saying this, whatever happened that day wasn't a ghost. I was packing my room at our old apartment, talking on the phone with my now boyfriend. My brother walks in and we have a whole conversation, and he even talked to my boyfriend. There was no doubt in that moment that this was my brother. So, of course, I didn't think anything weird when I got up to get something in the bathroom, and then came back and he was gone. I remembered picking him up this morning to help him move, and him and my stepdad just left a short bit ago. I felt my whole body panic as I realized that I wasn't chatting with him. He wasn't even there. They were at our new house. I immediately went to the phone and asked him what they were talking about, but my boyfriend didn't remember. Let's call my brother Sam. I called for Sam before I realized, and after that, I called him. And he'd been at the other house for about an hour, so who were me and my boyfriend talking to? Some would say a skinwalker, but I don't believe it. It looked and sounded like him, though. It's been a few months, and we finished moving and have been moved in for a month, or maybe 2 by that point. I work early mornings, 3 a.m. to noon, sometimes later, but I come home and then watch my nephew. From 3 to 10 on that day, everything had been feeling off. My nephew, who's 1 year and 4 months old, has been talking to something and playing with something. It doesn't seem bad, but you can feel something in here. I hear kitchen cabinets shutting and closing along with the doors when no one's home. I brought this up to my mom, and she says that she's noticed something there too. She then explained that on her way home, she saw what looked like a huge smoke ring in the sky. Like someone took a hit and puffed a circle, but it was giant. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I've also been experiencing brown recluse spiders in my bed lately, after having a nightmare about something unhuman. I have no idea if this is related, but if anyone knows anything, I would like some help figuring out what's going on. I'm shook, and my family is worried that it's attached to someone or something in the house. But whatever it is not human. Thank you for letting me submit my story. I'm a big fan. Everyone, have a good day. Thank you for submitting your story. I don't know if this was an alien encounter or a dream. I made this Reddit account to talk about this experience specifically because it has plagued me for decades. To preface this, when I was a child, I had the most disturbing nightmares, night terrors, and I would occasionally sleepwalk. This was on a nightly basis for years. My parents got me a bunny, an emotional support stuffy, and it did help, but I still had awful nightmares. I remember a lot of them vividly to this day, and I'm 31 years old. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I visited my aunt and uncle with my parents and younger brother. It was about 4 hours away. We left the stuffy, and I'm telling you, this was like sacrilegious in my family. It was a good time, though. Music playing, visiting my cousin, and playing Pokemon. I don't remember the occasion, but we had lots of fun hanging in their apartment. It was a smaller living space, So my mom would sleep on the bottom bunk in my cousin's room with my brother and I, and my dad stayed on the couch. My mom was falling asleep and I just couldn't. I kept waking her up saying I couldn't sleep, as children do, and she was brushing me off, as parents do. This is the crazy part. I'm looking at my mom and her face starts distorting, like physically changing before my eyes. My mom is a beautiful woman, but she looked like a demon as her face shifted. I cried telling her, and she told me just to go to sleep. I was against the wall, and two small beings walked into the room. They were smaller than my 5-year-old self. The closest description would be the demon dogs from that old live-action Scooby-Doo movie. And I know that sounds silly, as that movie hadn't been released yet. They went to the foot of the bed, and I kid you not, they dragged my mother and brother's souls out of their body. Like, they dragged something from them that was light in color, like a deflated human figure. They walked out of the room, and I started becoming hysterical. I woke up my mom again, and she told me to go to sleep with my dad on the couch. I don't know how I got the courage, but I got up and went to open the bedroom door. They were in the hallway. I was frozen, awake, and watching until they took a turn towards the front door. From the bedroom door, I could see my dad on the couch, so I walked to him, and the living room was completely distorted, like moving in a wave pattern. I tried to wake up my dad, and that part's a little fuzzy, but ultimately I went into my aunt's room. She was fully awake with the lights on, watching wrestling. I told her what had happened and then slept in her room. Everyone was so freaked out. My dad and uncle literally drove over 4 hours back to our house to get the stuffed animal, and I slept fine the next night. So, dream? Alien encounter? I honestly don't know. And here's the kicker. My mom and brother both suffer with alcohol addiction. She's been married and divorced 5 times. My brother was actually on meth for years. I'm not perfect, nor have I led a perfect life, but I will always wonder. It's taken me some time to feel comfortable posting, but I hope you'll enjoy this post. This is one of the few strange things I have experienced in my time living in Indiana. As someone who's always prided myself on being grounded in reality, I've sought research and facts to feel comfortable in my experiences and beliefs. What I experienced one night in my hometown in rural southern Indiana left me without an explanation. I was 21 at the time. It was a painfully average night. No strange weather was occurring and the sky was exceptionally clear. The countryside sat covered in a familiar blanket of darkness, with the faint light of the moon and stars lighting the swaying crops in the fields near my home. The time was around 2 a.m. My partner at the time had just driven me home from his dorm in the city. Engaged in yet another argument, as was customary for any amount of time spent in the car, my partner exited the vehicle. I soon followed, hoping to end the heated discussion. All was quickly forgotten as something had caught my partner's attention. As the sound of the night seemed to fall silent, I followed his gaze to the sky above my neighbor's house. In that space was a bizarre and peculiar sight. A massive, seemingly flat circle loomed above the house, blocking the view of the stars. On this strange anomaly, lights of indiscernible colors oscillated rhythmically and rapidly. Entranced, my partner's gaze was lost in the moment. I couldn't help but approach it with skepticism. Perhaps it was a trick of the light. We had our share of odd weather patterns, static activity, and uncommon forms of lightning in the past. As we stood there, my partner, lost in awe, turned to see if I was witnessing the same sight. A sudden shift in air pressure signaled the departure of this mysterious object, leaving us both in a state of utter confusion. As I stood very still in the same place, trying to figure out what I had just witnessed, my partner abruptly ran down the road, attempting to follow where he believed the object had gone. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but dissect the events of that night, searching for rational explanations. Although I had tried, I couldn't rid myself of the unease that lingered from being unable to explain the event. While others may be quick to embrace the supernatural, I feel mostly comfortable operating within logic and reason. And that being said, I must admit that there are some things that defy explanation. In the pursuit of truth, I find solace in the embrace of logic, yet remain humbled by the mysteries that persist beyond its grasp. I'm a long-time listener, first-time submitter. Hello, I'm a 13-year-old boy from Finland, and this happened to me around a year ago on summer vacation. P.S. I do believe in the paranormal. So, I was at my classmate's house for the night. He is the same age as me. We decided to put up a tent in their huge backyard, and as we were putting it up, he went to get some water. Then, I heard a psst sound from the woods nearby. I ignored it, and then I heard it again. "Who is that?" I yelled at it. Then I heard giggling from the same spot, and then my friend came back. We finished setting up the tent. Then, around 2 to 3 in the morning, when my friend was sleeping, I heard footsteps from the woods. At this point, I have to say that the woods were really close to the tent. Anyways, the thing again whispered, "Psst." I didn't respond. Then, 2 seconds later, it said, "Jack." Not my actual name, because my name is a Finnish name. "I know you're in there." I froze. How did this thing know my name? Then I remembered that we had a knife in the tent, because we're Finnish. So I grabbed the knife and slowly opened the tent's door, and I gripped the knife as hard as I could. What I saw will haunt me to this day. It was a woman with a warped face and really messy hair. She looked at me with a smile on her face and said, "I know you, Jack." Hey, I love your stories and remembered an old paranormal story that I had. This happened between the ages of 3 to 5. My parents and I lived in a 2-story house with 2 bedrooms. I had a little brother who was 1 year younger than me, and we slept in the same bedroom, just different beds. One night, I woke up. I'd had a nightmare, but I can't remember what it was about. But I woke up in a cold sweat peeking out to the window in front of my bed, and I saw a wolf walking in. Now, wolves aren't scary, but we were on the 2nd floor. All the bedrooms were, and it didn't look normal. It was big, long, and it seemed not quite like a wolf, but it looked like a wolf. It's kind of hard to explain, and as any kid would do, I hid under my covers. It was a few minutes later, and I looked back out there, and there was nothing there. I sighed and eventually got the scared feeling that I was being watched and ran to my parents' room, telling them that I'd had a nightmare, hence that I wanted to sleep in their room. They reluctantly agreed. As I laid in between them, I felt an odd sensation around my body. At first I thought it was normal, something everyone has before they drift to sleep. I felt my eyes shut and then went to sleep, but when I woke up, I was now on the floor. It was strange considering I went to sleep between my parents. I moved back onto the bed and fell asleep on the edge of the bed. I was halfway asleep until I felt something lifting me up and putting me on the floor again. I had that same strange sensation around my body and questioned how this was happening. As a kid, you may just think this is normal. However, I've never experienced this again in my life. It's almost interesting and scary at the same time. What do you think, though?